Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. Just been dealing with an error message there. But anyway, good morning to all. Happy New Year. So I see that there's already a ton of different questions in the chat. And I actually want to go through the data here. I'm not going to answer a lot of questions on this session. I also don't have a very long time. It's New Year. We always plan a family outing on New Year's Day. But I've got to go for that. But I did want to go through the data and take a look at the data with you. I'm not going to get into specific individual embassy questions, and I'm planning to record some videos on each region and also embassy performance. So I'll show you some of the data here. We'll talk about some of the important findings that we've just got from the data, and you know, it'll be a fairly short session because of that. So let's get straight into it. Firstly, let me just say thank you as ever to Zarthisius, who has extracted the data for us. If you've asked me any question for the last 2 or 3 months, I've probably said something to you like, wait until January the 1st. And this is because the CEAC data is available in the database for checking from January the 1st each year. And Zarthisius extracts the data in the middle of the night on January the 1st. It went live on Mountain Time, just like usual. And Zarthisius was there extracting it and handling errors and that sort of thing straight away. So much gratitude to him for doing that. So we have some data. Okay, let's firstly go to Zarthisius's site, show you where I'm getting the data from. Let me put me over this side, that would be better. Now, Zarthisius told me off because I've not been clicking this button, but so this gives you a nice big screen view of the data, which is good. Let me see if I can just get rid of me. I'm kind of like, I don't want to miss any part of the screen. There we go. Okay, so this is the data we have. We can see each region, and we can see the layout of the data in each region. Let's have a look at some of these regions for a start. We'll have a look at that. Africa. Africa, we can see goes up to about 122,000. I'll give you these exact numbers. Actually, let me just switch to those. That's the high-level findings that we've got so far. If you've been watching my videos over the last few months, you may have seen this spreadsheet a couple of times, and there was a couple of sort of predictions or assumptions in this data that I had that I was looking to confirm from the CEAC data. So one of the predictions had been the highest case number reported from each region. Now, this isn't a prediction of mine as such. This is people reporting the highest case number and me making a note somewhere of the highest case number that I've heard. And it's somewhat accurate to an extent, but not always accurate. You sometimes get people saying, I've got case number, you know, whatever. And when you extract the data, there's nothing to back that up. That someone's just, you know, made up complete nonsense. This year, I had someone telling me they had Africa case number 176,000, and I chose to ignore that one because it seemed like a ridiculous outlier. But I was also told Asia 54,000 was a real number, and that's turned out to be sort of nonsense. So what was reported was pretty accurate, but in the case of Asia, it was not that accurate at all. So anyway, for some time now, we've been assuming that Africa highest case number is about 122,000. It is. The highest case number is 122,907. Let me just check that I've got that right. Yes, 122,907. And these are numbers directly from Zarthisius. So, and I know there's a little bit of discrepancy with someone else that extracts data, but I always trust ZARS data and information, most of all, frankly. 122,907 is the highest case number for Africa. That's the highest case number of selectees. This is not a prediction about where the highest case number will get to in the end. This is the highest selectee number. I had heard case number AS for 54,000 in Asia. Turns out that the highest case number is only 42,876. EU was pretty accurate. I'd been led to believe 69,000. Turns out that it's about 67,000, 66,932. There was another high. I had one report on my blog, funnily enough, from a person who had OC 6800. That turned out to be nonsense. The highest case number in OC is 4999, so 5,000 essentially. And then I knew the SA number was going to be about 5,000, but it turns out it's 5,574. Okay, so these numbers in green are sort of confirmation of things. Then I had some other calculations that I had made based on the knowledge I had and the assumptions that I could make, right? So I had made some assumptions about how many cases we would have. It turned out I was pretty accurate on all of those. So here are the actual number of cases. So what this means is that in Africa, there are 33,143 cases out of the 122,907 numbers, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means that they've got a lot of holes, right? How many holes have we got? Well, overall, we've got a case density of 27%, meaning 73% of all the case numbers in Africa are holes, right? And holes, as you probably should be aware by now, is cases that are disqualified even before the results are announced, right? They're usually duplicate entries or people who have a bad photo and that sort of thing. And those cases are kicked out. So if you have a case number, you're not a hole, right? And then, so the case density numbers were pretty accurate. I had a pretty good estimation of all the case numbers here, like how many cases I projected. This was a projection. And I had a pretty good projection of the density. The increase, or sorry, the decrease in Asia has meant that my density for Asia was too low. It's actually 33%. Density, 67% holes, right? But then for the other regions, I'm pretty much, pretty close. Why was I not close on that one? Oh yeah, because it went a little bit higher. So I had my my number here for South America was a little bit low, and so that's changed the density a little bit. I had the right number of cases, but just a different sort of spread. Okay, so, and then the derivative rates, here was the derivative rates that I had been using, the 2023 rates, and they were pretty close to the 24 rates. So the derivative rates per region haven't changed very much, which is expected, that's normal. Okay, so that's that data. Then we look at Zarthesius' site again. We can see that data in a visual format, which is nice. So here's Africa. We can see all of this blue color is the holes, right? So 27% density of cases, meaning 73% of holes. That means there's much more holes, much more of this blue color than there is anything else, right? And you can see the distribution. It starts off higher and then goes down as time goes on. This is very noticeable in Asia, as it always is. And I created a video some couple of months ago, I suppose, that showed how Asia would look, how this chart would look for Asia. And I said that there would be sort of two steps, right? And sure enough, we have that two steps. So we have two cutoff points. And what that means is that between Nepal and Iran, there are one of the countries is limited at just under 14,000 or 13,000, and the other country is limited at 22,000. Now, I'm going to guess that Iran has all of its case numbers under 13,000. I think this is Iran first and Nepal second. So that means that we should see case numbers up to about nearly 22,000 for Nepalese cases. And more or less all of those will go current, by the way, because there are enough selectee, or there is a good number of selectees. They're not over-selected in Nepal. For some reason, they always keep the number of Nepal selectees down at about 3,800, which is about right. So I expect Nepal to go current, right? That's going to be, that's an immediate prediction, right? Iran is only up to 13,000. That's okay, but you'll see slow progress in the visa bulletin for Iran in particular and Nepal, because the progress for Asia as a whole is probably going to go a little bit faster than the progress or the speed for Iran and Nepal. That's just the way it will work. And if you understand what this data means, you'll understand why. If you don't, come back in a few days' time, and I'm going to be explaining these regions in much more detail, so that you'll really understand. In EU, there are a number of cliffs, as I call these. I call them cliffs. I don't, I've never really had a better word, but there is. So, for example, just before 17,000, there's a big drop. All right, that's a cliff as far as I'm concerned. And so you can see that the number of cases per 1,000 changes dramatically at that point. There appears to be another cliff at around about 26,000. That's another country cutoff. And yet another one at around about 41,000 or so. And so I think there are three, it looks like there are three, there might be four countries cut off in Europe, right? And if we go back to the number of selectees, we're looking, countries that are cut off normally have about 5,500 selectees, depending on the year, between 5,000 and 6,000 selectees. So when we see the selectee counts for Europe, we could probably, in fact, we can just bring that up, visa bulletin. And let's just bring that up. If we go back to the page, let's quickly do this and you'll see what I mean, right? If we go back to last year's data and we look at September, that's where the countries were listed in terms of how many selectees there were per country. We'll scroll down to it in that and we'll go to Europe. Okay, now in Europe, we're looking for countries that have around about 5,000 selectees. Uzbekistan is one. Ukraine used to be a limited country. I'm not sure they are this year. Let's just come back to that. Looks like Russia is limited. Uzbekistan is, and where's my third? Probably, yeah. I'm not sure. So it's possible that Kyrgyzstan is limited. It's possible that Ukraine is. So Russia, yeah, Russia for sure, Uzbekistan for sure, and I don't see another one that's real big there. So it's possible that we've got only two, which would be Russia and Uzbekistan, but I think we might have a couple of others limited, and they would be limited perhaps at a later point. So Ukraine. So what that means is, looking at the data, is that one of these drops, so for example that one will probably be either Uzbekistan or Russia, and so we can tell that because probably in some Russian forums and in Uzbek forums, there's probably discussion, and all the people that are comparing their numbers will have numbers under 17,000 in one or the other of those countries. So that's how we would know, right? So that's what the country cutoffs does to those countries. Then Oceania, no country cutoffs in Oceania, nor in South America. So you get a consistent sort of pattern of wholes versus cases across the full number range, right up to case number 5,000, or case number 4,999, and the same sort of thing in South America. Okay, that's how the data looks. There's a couple of things I want to point out here, and I'm not going to do a great deal of analysis on this video, as I mentioned, but I do just want to point out a couple of things that are important, right? Firstly, we'll be able to look at some of this data, and we'll be able to plot this into the other spreadsheet that I created just recently to show an embassy performance. We'll be able to do that, but we can already see that there are 2,200 people issued in Africa, 2,700 almost in Europe, 800 in Asia, and so on. You can see the numbers. So 6,110 people have been issued up until the end of December. That is a pretty good year. It's a pretty good start. It's better than DV 2023, and we can do some comparisons on that. We can also see that 22,715 people have been scheduled. Now that number will, by the end of the year, get to about 70,000. So of the 70,000 that I expect to be scheduled, nearly 23,000 already have been, which would have been, up until the end of February, right? We've had 5 months of scheduling. So, the program is motoring along pretty well. That's pretty much where I'd expect things to be. The first 3 months of the year are normally the quietest 3 months of the year, but they've done a pretty good job so far. If they simply did the same thing for 3 more quarters like that, that would be more than enough work. In other words, if we had, we're only going to get to 70,000, right? So 70, 71, 72,000, something like that. So they've already had the first 3 months of the year plus the first couple of January and February, which are the first 5 months. That's pretty much where we would expect them to be at this point, and they can schedule up to about 7,000 people in a single month, 7 to 7,500 people roughly in a single month if they really want to, right? They generally don't do that many in a single month. But it is possible. That's the capacity of the embassies. So there is no problem in DV 2024 in terms of using all of the visas. They will use all the visas. We will see a full year, right? Now, the other thing that I want people to look at on this site, on Xarthisius' site, is understand positionally where they are. So, for example, if you've been thinking about your case number, you might have been thinking that your case number was high because you've never heard that case number before in Africa, for example. Maybe you had case number 70,000, right? And you thought that was very high because you didn't really understand, how things were laid out. And so you just said, oh, 70,000, that's a really high number, right? Or 80,000 is a high number there, and you were panicking about that, right? Well, what you can now do is you can now understand how many cases there are before you and after you, and that's a much more important thing to understand, right? Now, let's just take some numbers, and I've made a note of some numbers I want to show you here. I want to show you the halfway point for each of the regions. To show you how that distribution of cases and this sort of reducing density that happens in the big 3 regions, how that makes a difference to what your case number really means, right? So if you were case number, if all the cases go up to 60, in Africa, let's say all the case numbers go up to 122, 900, whatever that number is, right, 907. Then the halfway point is about case number 61454, right, in Africa. Now, is that halfway in terms of the cases? No, not anything like that. So let's have a look at that. So Xarthisius has a neat little tool here where you can put in your case number and see how many cases are before your case number and how many are after your case number. Now, even though I've picked a number which is almost exactly halfway through the case number range, you can see that there are nearly 22,000 cases before this case number and 11,300 after. In other words, a 2/3, 1/3 distribution of numbers in front of the halfway point, right? So you can't just look at the numbers and say, "Oh, my number is halfway through, and therefore I've got a pretty good chance because it's only halfway through all of the case numbers." You have to understand how many cases there are in front of your case. That's what's more important, okay? And what that can mean is that in the big three regions, you need to understand where your position is in the line, right? Now let's look at this. This is going to be very important for Asia and Europe. So let's just do those again. I've got numbers that I know to exist, and we'll check the halfway point, right? So click on that. Now, the site is being hit by everyone at the moment, so it's a little bit slow, but it's not normally slow like this, but it's a little bit slow to respond. But anyway, we've got nearly 9,500 cases before and 4,500 cases after you in the Asia region. He goes on to say that yields approximately 18,900 people before you and 9,015 after you. Those numbers are estimates, whereas this number is precise, right? So this just shows roughly what the difference is between cases and people. But as I say, we don't have this precise data right now, but this is a pretty good estimate, right? So that's the halfway point. And again, there's almost, what is that? Yeah, almost 2/3 of the cases are before the halfway point, right? Let's do the same thing for Europe. You can see that. And yeah, we've got 14,264 before the halfway point and 8,241 after the halfway point. Now that continues, or that does not continue rather, for the other two regions. If I do the same thing for Oceania, you see a slight difference here, right? So in Oceania, there's 1,071 cases before the halfway point, 1,048 after the halfway point. In other words, the halfway point in Oceania and in South America is truly the halfway point. It's about half the distribution, and that's as expected. If you've been paying attention to this data over previous years, it's normal. But that shows you that for the big three regions, the case number is not necessarily what's important. It's the position within the whole data range. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I'm going to quickly have a look at, let me pop that back in. Pop me back in. I'm going to quickly look at the questions and see if there's any really good questions here, but I'm not planning to take many questions. Let's see. Lots of people who are asking, what are my chances with this number and that sort of, that sort of question. I don't want to get into those questions right now, and I probably really won't. I won't be answering specifics on this case number or that case number because it doesn't make sense. I can only talk in generalized ways. Okay, so just looking down at the questions here. Oh, interesting. Case number of 15K from Iran. That's interesting. So it's possible, if that's true, if you're truly from Iran, you're chargeable to Iran, then I would say that I might have the Asia numbers wrong there, because according to the data, there shouldn't be any case numbers from the first. Let me have back up here. This is where I want to show you. there. That cutoff point is under 13,000. So if you're telling me your case number 15,000 from Iran, then you must be in this group, and therefore Iran would be going up to 22,000, and Nepal would be under 13,000. That's possible, right? Will be maybe I can see any other people from Nepal and Iran. I'd asked for some data on this some weeks ago, and I really didn't get very good responses at all. I got some sort of confusing responses. So it is possible that I haven't switched around. That Nepal is cut off under 30,000, and Iran goes up to about 22,000. Nepal highest case number, yeah. So yeah, I'd like to know. So I'm just looking at that. Several comments about Nairobi. At a family reunion, watching BritSimon on my phone. Well, say hi to the family. We'll watch the rebroadcast. My math was that there were 17,556 real cases for 48,000 case numbers for AF. Yeah, that would sound about right. About 27% density across the whole range, but obviously the first 48,000 would have a higher number than the second 48,000, if you see what I mean. Oh, good point. Someone's just saying, how are the likes coming? That's my favorite question. Why are there no likes? Come on, guys, got to give me some likes on here. All right, so that should be. I don't see any sort of really great questions here. Oh, let me just answer this. 121K, is it over for me? Okay, so let me talk about the regions a little bit. I've been trying to tell people that there are too many selectees. Right now, we know that the case number in Africa goes up to 122,9, 122,907. Then your number at 121K is extremely high, and Algeria is probably going to meet its cap before your number becomes current, right? So even if the region goes current, and even if Algeria goes current, and I'll come back to that in a minute, you're at the back of a line not only of Africa but also Algeria, and Algeria are probably going to max out on the 38,000. So, Louis, it's probably bad news for you. There's probably not much chance, right? And in general, in Africa, I was asked by someone, I think yesterday, about case number 66,000 in the EU, right? Is that too high? Well, we know now that it's within 1,000 case numbers of the highest number. And yes, it's probably too high. I don't think EU is going to go current or get even close to it. And so, EU won't go current, Asia won't go current, Oceania and South America won't go current. The only region that might possibly go current is Africa. And the only reason that region would go current is through consistent bad behavior of embassies. So if you're a high case number in any of the regions, frankly, your chances are very limited. And you can now have a look at the data and try and figure out what that means. So, you should be able to do that now with a little bit of looking at that, right? And like that question, a similar sort of question, case number 57K. Now you have to think about where your case number is in relation to all of the cases. It's quite surprising to me, actually, I have to say, that Algerians still have case numbers at 122. I would have assumed that they were a limited country, but they're not, apparently, and that means that your case number is sort of less than halfway through the range for Algeria. Therefore, 57K in Algeria would be safe, whereas 121K in Algeria clearly isn't safe, right? So you can start to make some sort of assumptions there. You can start to figure those things out, right? we'll do, I see a question here, and we'll 7272522. Let's have a quick look here. Let's go back to Zarthesius, and we'll do the number here for AF 72522. Okay, we'll check this for Mohammed. Just give that a moment to pull that up. 72522. I'm expecting 2/3. Yeah, so 24,846 cases before you and 8296 after you. Now, I have some work to do some analysis to show you how to really figure out what this means in terms of how many cases can be before your case number before you can be considered unsafe, right? And so I need to do that for each of the regions, and I'll be publishing a video for each region specifically to explain how I would look at that if I were you and try and figure out whether you're safe or not. But it is clear. I mean, it's got to be clear to people now, I would have thought, that the very high case numbers in the regions are certainly at risk. There's just too many selectees. If we go back to the spreadsheet here, we look at this data, we can see that there are, that's the number of selectees for each of the regions. There was a 12% increase over DV 2023 in Africa, 16% increase in Asia, 25% in Europe, 77% in Oceania. Completely ridiculous to increase the numbers in Oceania that way. There's no justification for it. And 51% in South America. Now, these regions, these 4 regions that I'm highlighting here from Asia down to South America, none of those regions got current. And nevertheless, the government decided to increase the number of selectees, right? So they didn't go current in DV 2023. They've increased the number of selectees. It should be obvious to people that they're not going to go current in DV 2024, right? It should just be obvious. So, you know, there really isn't a need to ask. If your case number Oceania 4000, you're not going to go current, right? It should be clear at this point. I mean, we've got the data now. There are no more guessing games about that. It's just not going to happen for you. And that's probably the same at case number 3000 in Oceania. Now, is that the same at case number 2000 in Oceania? Well, we'll have to look at that data. That's a little bit more nuanced, but there's really no reason why the cases will go to 3000 or 4000 ranges in Oceania. That one's very obvious, right? And we can do the same thing in South America. For EU and Asia, things are a bit more nuanced. And in Africa, it really depends on the behavior of certain embassies like Cairo, for example, or Addis over the next few months, right? Is Cairo suddenly going to get busy and process those Egyptian and Sudanese cases? Don't know. Is Nairobi going to keep up the good start that it's done and perhaps do more? You know, don't know. We'll have to see, right? So we'll start looking at that data and start figuring out how the embassies are behaving. And with the ones that are misbehaving, are they bad enough and big enough to change the trajectory for the region as a whole in Africa? That's really what I'm going to be, you know, doing some studying on. Okay, so okay, so that should cover that. Let me just see if there's any last quick questions here. Upcoming bulletin Asia prediction, please. No, I'm not going to just randomly pick a prediction there. Can I do 112,206? You can do that, but you almost don't need to. I mean, you're within the last few hundred numbers of the whole range, right? I mean, it should be obvious. You can't do it, by the way. Good question, ICC. How do you calculate the numbers before and after for the accept countries? You can't do it by you can get the region, but you can't get the accept countries. It just doesn't work at the country level. In order to understand where you lie within the country, not that that really matters normally, but in order to do that, you need to understand the distribution of cases by country within the region. That's much more complicated, and Zarthisius's data doesn't help you do that, or at least the online representation of that doesn't. To an extent, I can do that, but not particularly accurately. And I need to know precisely which is the cutoff for which country. And I don't always have that data. In fact, as you can see, even in this video, I could be wrong between Nepal and Iran for Asia. And I've got much less chance of pinning that down properly for Africa. But if you did know, for example, that take Asia as a simple example. I've shown how to do this in a video. If you know the number of selectees and the number of cases, therefore, that a particular region should, a particular country should have, and you know their cutoff point, their limited point within the range, then you could say how many cases there should be from that country in each and every block of data, each 1,000 cases. You can do that. And that's pretty easy to do in Asia, harder to do in Africa, sort of okay in EU, and completely pointless doing that in Oceania and South America because there's no cutoff countries, right? So yeah, good question there, ICC. When will the data come through? So when is that video coming where you explain in detail? Well, there's 5 regions. That means 5 videos. It's going to take me a few days to do that math, that number crunching, and produce a video on each one of those. So be a little bit patient. But the reason that I'm showing you how to look at this data is that you can go and have a look at the same data yourself. You can make your own predictions. You can do your own analysis. There's nothing particularly I have. I mean, obviously, there will now be a bunch of YouTubers watching this video right now who will now go in and start talking about the same things because they generally sort of copy what I say. I had a YouTuber, what was his name? Verified So, who more or less took the script from one of my videos and repeated it about 2 hours after I published a video. Like 2 hours later, he literally almost word for word published the same video. So I know they do it. So it makes me chuckle that they don't have any original thoughts. But there will be these various channels who will be talking about this data, so you can get information from them as well. But it won't be much original data, put it like that. All right, so let's see. Oh, Nepal, case number 11K from Nepal is in risk. I did say on this video that there is no case number in Nepal that is at risk. Okay, so that includes 11K because there is no case number from Nepal that's risk. Okay. All right. So I think. Oh, okay. This is another good question from ICC. That's 2 really good questions. Let me just run through what the case status means in each of the. If you download the file and you want to see the data, this is the data. Let's have a look. This is the 24 file, right? And we want to talk about each one of these status codes, what they mean, right? So NVC is the code, the status code that every case starts at, right? So if the status is at NVC, it simply means that case has not been scheduled for interview yet. You can't tell from that status anything. You can't tell whether the person submitted a DS-260 or whether their DS-260 is processed. The only thing that you can tell is that it's not a hole and that they haven't been scheduled for interview yet. So that's what at MVC means, right? The next case, or the next status that you might see is in transit. In transit, let me just show you this, what I'm looking at here. Actually, put me over there. Yeah. And if let's just do the status drop down. There we go. Okay, these are the statuses I'd like to understand, right? In transit is briefly shown, and it's when KCC have sent out a 2NL to a case. They've sent the case to the embassy, but the embassy has not come into CEAC yet and marked the case as having been received. They've got the case. The cases are transferred electronically, but they haven't updated CEAC yet. Okay, so not a big deal, but you will sometimes see cases in transit. And while they're in transit, we don't know which embassy that is. Okay. All right. So is that right? I'm saying that. I'm thinking, is that true? Yeah. We don't know the embassy yet, right? So there are a few cases in transit. Okay. So now have a look back here. All right. So next status after in transit is ready. Ready means that the embassy has got into your CEAC data and updated the fact that they have received your case. You are scheduled for interview, obviously, and that's good. Sometimes, though, you will see cases staying ready for the whole year. They never switch out of that status. And that typically means that the person didn't show up for their interview at all, or they showed up, but for whatever reason, the embassy didn't update their case from ready to refused or whatever else. They will update cases to issued. So we get the data that's really important, the issue numbers, and we get the refusals. But there are cases that stay in ready cases. And as I say, I typically think these are cases where people don't show up for the interview, or as in last year, there were cases, quite a lot of cases, where interviews were cancelled because of the end of the year, right? So at the end of the year, we will still see some cases in ready. It happens every year. Then there are two refusals. You'll see refused, which is a permanent refusal, and you'll see also a refused status, which is a 221G status. And there's a slight difference between those two cases in the online system that allows us to figure out whether a case is on 221G or a permanent refusal. 221G is like a temporary refusal. It can be overcome. So it could be you turned up for the interview, your medical wasn't ready, and so you're temporarily refused until the medical is provided. Or you miss some document, so you're temporarily refused until you provide that document. And then when you've provided the document or the medical, in my example, then you can turn to issued or perhaps even get refused permanently. 221G can last for some time in some cases, particularly where they've given you a DS 5535. That's something that can happen for additional background checking, right? And then what's the other? Also, and the other case that you'll see, well, issued, obviously, right? You can guess what that means. And the other one you see sometimes is administrative processing. And this one's a fun one. Let's have a look at that one. Administrative processing is a very specific point in the process where your case has been approved at the interview, your visa is being printed, and while your visa is being printed for a couple of days, typically you'll see this status. Now, this particular one had a status date of December 29th. So yeah, a couple of days ago, this particular one went into administrative processing status, and that's because their visas are being printed. So within a couple of days from now, these three cases will switch over to issued, okay? That's quite rare to see that, but it's an exciting one because it reliably means you're going to get your visa in a couple of days. Okay, so So hopefully that's interesting to you to understand those statuses. But and I hope that answered your question, ICC. Okay. All right, everybody. I'll have to call that a day. I've gone longer than I expected to. My wife, I'm sure, wants some help in getting ready to go out. So, so thank you for joining along with me this morning. Please do give me a thumbs up. Let me know if you like the video, and make sure you're subscribed. And then watch out in the next few days for me to produce the videos for each region to do that analysis for you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.